are not necessarily a no. They are a request for more information. They can be a speed bump on our journey to close the opportunity, but in my experience, they're often a buying sign. Because if a customer has an objection, and think of an objection as just a question, it is maybe a question that they have. Is this best for us? Is this price appropriate? Are these terms what I need? Is this packaging going to work for me? Whatever those objections are, they are typically a question from the customer that needs to be addressed. And if a customer or prospect has that question and they don't give you the opportunity to answer it, you are likely going to lose every time. So surfacing objections and ensuring that their questions are answered through the course of your communication and conversations is critical to advancing the deal. It is a positive thing. So I'm going to launch a poll right here, and I'm going to ask you, what is the objection that you fear the most? The dreaded objection that comes up. And I'm going to ask you all to go ahead and select how that comes up. And if there's something that comes up in here that is your personal dreaded objection and it is not showing up on this list, go ahead and throw it in chat and we'll talk about that. Shocking that price is one of the prices coming up, but maybe it's packaging. Maybe you have a holistic approach to a solution and you don't sell bits and pieces individually, and it's how you bundle it. Maybe it is a competitive alternative is in there. Maybe it's terms and conditions. I'm working with a client this week and they say that their terms, which are completely non-negotiable, often get in the way. And I do see that. So I'm going to end the poll here. We've got most of us voting right now. Take 2 more seconds and give it in. And let's see what we've got. I'm sharing the results with you all now. So 40% dreaded objection is price. It is what it is, right? You are likely engaged with a firm called value selling because you're not the low-cost competitor in your space. You are not the cheapest alternative. And that's okay. We'll talk about that. Packaging, it might be how you bundle things. We've got a vote there. Competition can come up in a couple of different ways, and we'll address that one. Terms and business practices, again, that's a big one. For some of us, that is out of our control as a sales professional. And then I've got the other, lack of urgency, no urgency. So we'll talk about that. Yeah, this is good. I'll do it someday. So very interesting that we've got that. And, you know, I have a friend of mine who says objections always fall into one of 3 buckets: no need, no money, or no urgency. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So the reality is there's a finite number of objections that most of us run into in our space. So one of our tactics is to make sure that when these questions come up, that we are not a deer in the headlights per se, and that we've anticipated them and are ready to address them. I know when I'm selling our stuff, it is rare that there isn't at least a question or 2 about the investment that we're asking them to make. It is rare that there isn't at least a question or 2 asking me to compare and contrast against an alternative. And oh, by the way, maybe that alternative is status quo, or maybe that alternative is build it myself. But I need to be prepared for that. So we're going to talk about how we can better understand what's on our customer's mind and anticipate these objections, because they are going to show up again and again and again. They're just going to sound a little bit different. And objections also, by the way, happen with our existing customers. It may sound different, but maybe we've had a customer who had an experience that was slightly different than they had anticipated. And maybe we need to address an objection that comes up as a result of something not going as well as we would have liked in our delivery of our services, which happens all the time. So here's a couple things that I want us to think about and be prepared for. First of all, we know that our current reality is sales can be a challenge. And one of the reasons sales is a challenge is because buying is hard for most companies right now. And buying is hard because there's a lot of people involved and they need to get to a consensus decision. And you take a team of 8 or 10 people from different parts of any organization and try to get them to agree on anything, that is a lot of work. And the communication is a complex spider web of different side conversations, agendas, and what they're trying to do. But at the end of the day, people don't want to be sold, but when they're ready and when they've identified the need and that need is worth addressing, they do want to buy. And so we need to understand that. We all know our prospects are educated. I'm preaching to the choir on that. They have predetermined ideas and preferences. They have done their homework. They have experience. They have asked their friends. They have asked their colleagues. They have done their own research, and they all have predetermined ideas of what they think they know. And sometimes their thinking is incomplete and needs to be reshaped. The other thing that I think is really important is the close is not an event. It is the natural outcome of a well-executed buying process facilitated by a professional sales executive, whatever your title might be. And when we go through this in a frictionless way, we find a way to they naturally execute on that. And then we know that with the current economic headwinds, whether we're going into a recession or not, I have no idea. But I am experiencing quite a bit of risk aversion from our clients and prospects. They are not changing quickly. And there has to be compelling reason and compelling urgency for them to take a risk and change. And unless you're on renewals, you are almost always selling some sort of change. So let's go through what we think is critical for objections. First of all, anticipate them. We know that the price objection is going to come up because it comes up 99.9% of the time. So let's be prepared. And how are we going to prepare? We are going to be prepared with questions in order to clarify what their objection is. I'll tell you a little story. Years ago, I was selling consulting services to a healthcare organization in New England, and we were bidding on a big deal for us at the time. It was going to be a 7-figure consulting engagement, and we had a tiger team of professionals building this response to this proposal and going in and presenting. And we had worked hard to make sure that our pricing and packaging was incredibly compelling. And we wanted to mitigate that the investment level, which we were asking them to make, which again was a big number. It was in 7 figures. It was in the millions and millions of dollars. We were trying to mitigate it and defend it and do that. So through that process, we had kind of sharpened our pencil. We had come up with what we thought was the best price, best package, best approach. And we presented this, and all of a sudden we got a pricing objection, and we were like, shoot, because what happens when you get a pricing objection as a sales professional? If you're like me, my mind automatically goes to, well, the price must be too much. But in this situation, we asked a few questions, and it was exactly the opposite. The customer was concerned that our price might be too low. And that might put the timetable and the whole project at risk if we had to go back and start nickel and diming them for more money. So when we dug into that, we understood that the objection wasn't what we thought, it was the exact opposite. And that was really the second step of identifying how you handle objections. The first thing is to really dig in and make sure you understand that question. If somebody throws you an objection about pricing or about urgency, understand what that is. What is the underlying question behind the question? And what can you ask to really get to the why and clarify that? Because if we just make an assumption about that objection without clarification, we could answer the wrong question. So clarification is really important. Do we really understand what's going on here? The second step is really diagnosing where in the buying process has this question arisen. So for example, if it's urgency, maybe it has to do with the business issue or the business imperative that we had identified that was leading to the solution that they were looking at. Maybe something has changed in that business issue. And that has happened. As a matter of fact, at the beginning of the pandemic, there's not a company on the planet who did not expect to buy something in April. And when the pandemic and the shutdown happened, changed their business imperative and bought different stuff, whether it was Zoom or home office chairs or headsets for all of their employees who were going remote. Whatever it was, people bought things in April of 2020 that they didn't think they needed in March of 2020, and things that they thought they needed in March of 2020 didn't get bought in April of 2020. So really understanding where that diagnostic is. If it is a competitive objection and you know you're neck and neck with a competitor, maybe it is something in how your solution is being presented that you need to go back and recreate need or remind the need on differentiation. If it's price, it's value. If the price is the objection, then it has to do with value. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't times where the value's there and we still have to provide a win to the procurement people in helping them get to that point, which is why I said sometimes objections are presented as an entree into negotiating. If it becomes a negotiation, and when you're handling objections, I find it really important to isolate that. So for